Thank you. The topic that I was supposed to speak about, but it nonetheless is one dear to my heart. I'm talking this evening about cognitive enhancement. Some of you may know, I don't think everybody who is here now was here earlier in the day, but we have been at a meeting which has been almost entirely devoted to another form of human enhancement, that is human improvement, moral enhancement. But my own belief is that the most reliable and the most effective method of moral enhancement, both for now and for the foreseeable future, is in fact the enhancement of our cognitive, our intellectual powers. Because I personally regard ethics as a deliberative, reflective activity, but no more of that. Now, I have a lifelong obsession with enhancement of all sorts, with enhancement of human beings. And I think the reason that I have this lifelong obsession, I would like you to think, that it is because I have been throughout my life painfully conscious of my own inadequacies and have sort of lusted after, intellectually lusted, that is, after the idea that I might be able to improve my cognitive functioning and hence improve my qualities as a teacher, as a lecturer, and as a human being. And to that end, I have written 2.5 books about human enhancement, about the various ways in which we humans can improve and have attempted to improve our functioning in a whole range of directions. Have attempted to improve our cognitive functioning, but also our physical functioning, our emotional functioning, and so on. Because I think that there are many ways of trying to define what is distinctive about human beings, or persons as the term I would prefer to use, rather than using a species-specific description. Some people, a good friend of mine, John Salston, regards us as essentially, we humans, as essentially scientific. Others regard us as essentially language users or tool users or all sorts of things. I think we are essentially self-improvers. And by self-improvement, I mean both the improvement of ourselves and our functioning, but also the improvement of our interaction with the world, and indeed the improvement of where we live, the place that we inhabit, namely this particular planet at this particular moment. Whether or not we are to be permitted to go on improving ourselves is an interesting political and legal question. And I want to start this talk with one of my favorite quotations from the Irish poet and playwright Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde. Some of you will know his plays and his work. And he offered on one occasion a definition of selfishness. He said, "Selfishness is not living as one wishes to live. It is asking other people to live as one wishes to live." And that definition of selfishness also, of course, encapsulates a thesis about the importance of liberty, the importance of autonomy in human affairs. It captures the idea that what matters is our freedom to live as we wish to live and not to tolerate other people telling us how to live our own lives. And it is because I am very firmly committed to that thesis, to the thesis of liberty and individual and political autonomy, that I've also, for a very long time, championed the right of individuals like us, people, to have control of our destinies to the extent to which we can make of our lives what we choose to make of them, and to avail ourselves of new technologies as they come on stream to further that objective. Now, for the rest of my talk this evening, I want to talk about the legitimacy and the reasons we might have to improve our cognitive powers of all sorts. And many of you will be familiar with recent debates about the possibilities that are now available for improving ranges of cognitive powers. And I want to start with the supposition. Suppose I'm a university teacher. I've been a university teacher for a very long time. So I'm particularly interested in the question of the abilities of my students, because I can tell you it is terribly boring to teach bad students. And one's satisfaction as a university teacher increases in proportion to the abilities of one's students. So suppose a university, let's imagine one so that we're not too personal about these things. Suppose a university, let's call it the famous, some of you may know of this institution, very famous institution, the famous Ritalin College in Virginia, in the United States. Suppose a university, we will call it Ritalin College, were to set out deliberately to improve the mental powers and capacities of its students. Suppose the aims of this institution were very explicitly to ensure that the students developed enhanced executive functioning, enhanced study skills, improvement in the focusing of attention, and in the manipulation of information. Suppose that a group of educationalists, they would have to be very bright educationalists. Educationalists are not normally very bright, but very bright educationalists had actually developed a curriculum that there were rational expectations could actually achieve results of this sort. What should we think? Well, I think we would be amazed, because knowing how useless educational theory normally is, we would have absolutely zero expectations that educational theory could accomplish something like this. But suppose it did. What should our reaction be? Suppose there was a curriculum breakthrough, a breakthrough in pedagogy, that was supposed to achieve this. What should our reaction be? Would we welcome it? Would we want to send our children to Ritalin College? Would we want to teach there ourselves if this methodology was proved to be successful? Well, suppose now that instead of an elaborate new curriculum and special teaching methods, we could use drugs to produce, if not more intelligent individuals, at least individuals with better cognitive functioning. What should our reaction be? Would it be ethical to do so? Would it be ethical not to do so? How could we deny to students access to improved cognitive functioning if that were possible? Suppose, for example, and I'm very fond of talking about to the senior members of my own university about this, suppose, as is in fact the case, there were drugs that would do these wonderful things, which there are. All of the improvements in cognitive functioning that I listed, improved concentration, improved executive functioning, improved memory, improved organization, are all proven results for a range of drugs now available. What should my university do? Suppose we heard, horror of horrors, those monsters down the road from where I work and live in Manchester, those horrors in Oxford, some of them actually have been at this meeting, had decided that they would steal a march, that they would gain an edge on my own university by providing these drugs free to all of their students. The evidence is, and we can come to that if you like, that you can get about 10% enhanced functioning from a combination of some of the extant drugs, Ritalin in particular, but also modafinil and one or two others. Now 10% is a big edge. 10% is the difference between a first-class degree. In my country, we divide the quality of the degree into 4 classes. First class, the second class is divided into 2, upper second, lower second, third class, and then pass and fail. It's 5 categories. And it matters greatly to your job prospects which class you fall into. Now suppose we could guarantee our students, by the use of these drugs, this extra 10 percentage points. Well, it would make the difference from somebody who was going to get a second to getting a first, from somebody who was going to get a fail to a pass. Seems to me that I always have perceived my own job as a teacher to do the best for my students, to give them the best chance that they possibly could have to do as well as they can. Now, if I heard that the monsters down in Oxford were doing this for their students, I think I'd want to make sure that we were doing the same for us, for our own. So, a real question is, would it be ethical not to provide these advantages to our students if we had the power, which we do, to do so? If the goal of enhanced cognitive functioning is something that we might legitimately strive to produce by curriculum modification, by education, including, of course, the more general health education of the community, if we could produce the goal of better cognitive functioning in that way, why should we not do so using drugs if they were safe enough? And I'll come back to what safe enough might mean in a little while. If these might be the legitimate aims of education and the legitimate aspirations of parents for their children and teachers for their students, how could they suddenly become illegitimate as the aims or the products of medical or life sciences as opposed to educational science or social science? Now, of course, enhancements of any sort are good if and only if they do the business, if and only if they enhance. So, of course, it is a real question whether they will do the job. But if they do, why should we resist? As I've mentioned, there are numerous and varied candidates for chemical cognition enhancers. A recent report listed literally scores, almost 100, I think. And two of the most popular, as I've indicated, are methylphenidate, Ritalin, a cognition enhancer with a good evidence base, widely used for improving various aspects of cognition in children and adults. And the second, modafinil, which enhances wakefulness and alertness and is identified for possible enhancement of the functioning of pilots, long-distance drivers, and military personnel. And let me take as the starting point for the next phase of this talk this evening a remark by the English biologist Stephen Rose, talking about the possible use of so-called smart drugs like Ritalin. And he asks this question: is it cheating to pass a competitive examination under the influence of such a drug? Polls conducted among youngsters make it clear that they do regard it as cheating, in the same way, he says, that the use of steroids by athletes is considered to be cheating. I'm very happy to discuss with you in a minute the parallels or lack of parallels between cognitive enhancement and physical enhancement in sports and athletics. Now, I think Rose is simply wrong to think that taking cognitive enhancers might be cheating in the same way that the use by athletes is considered, the use of drugs by athletes is considered to be cheating. If we ask why athletes using steroids are considered to be cheats, one obvious answer is that the rules of most of the sports, including the Olympic Games, but the rules of international football and almost all other competitive competitions in sports, preclude the use of performance-enhancing drugs. So if they are used by athletes or sportsmen and women, they are used in a clandestine way, secretly, in order to cheat, to gain a competitive advantage, which by hypothesis is not open to other competitors. But of course, if you change the rules so that the drugs were permitted, then it would not be cheating. So the question is not, is it cheating because the rules are X, but what rules should we have to govern both athletic competitions and indeed to govern other competitions of the sort that students go in for when they take examinations. Rose goes on. He says, it is okay to buy educational privilege for one's children by, for example, paying praying would be good too, for those of a religious bent, but by paying for private tuition, but dubious to enhance their skills by feeding them drugs. Well, let's look at the ethics of buying educational privilege for a moment. Certainly, buying educational privilege in a context in which some, but not all, can afford to do so, is certainly unfair in some sense. If, and you may want to challenge this, but if we defend people's rights to do this, it's because I think that we see education as a good, and we feel it's right, appropriate, to encourage people to provide good things for their children, and indeed for themselves, and wrong to deny them these goods, even if not all can obtain them. It is possible, of course, that people may be seeking an edge, as we call it in English, a competitive advantage, a relative advantage for their children or themselves over other people's children and other selves. But I suggest that it's perhaps more likely that they are simply seeking excellence per se, the best, rather than seeking an unfair advantage. To seek excellence, to do the best for your kids and for yourself, when others cannot match your efforts, will probably also confer an advantage. But I suggest that it is doubtful ethics to deny a benefit to any unless and until it can be delivered to all. The same is true of many other goods that cannot be equally provided for all, and I'll come back to some examples in a moment. Access to performance-enhancing drugs is obviously unlike education in that it is not considered to be an intrinsic good. Such an intrinsic good in terms of education is often termed education for its own sake. Education is a good in itself. And there is clearly, and will never be, I believe, any substitute for education. You can't learn facts from a pill, but you can assimilate facts faster and remember them better if you take certain pills. It develops transferable skills of all sorts, but some of those skills are also enabled or enhanced by drugs. Benefits reported for drugs like Ritalin and modafinil include, as I said in the introduction, enhanced executive functioning, enhanced study skills, improvement in the focusing of attention, and in the manipulation of information. Moreover, unlike formal education, access to these skills through drugs is instant and relatively low cost, certainly when compared to education or training. Let's now turn for a moment to the issue of justice. Is it fair that some people can access these sorts of advantages while others not? Let me declare an interest and make a confession. I'm not a religious-minded person, so I very rarely make confessions of any sort, but I will make this one and declare my interest. I am a habitual drug taker. I have, for a very large proportion of my life, taken daily doses of a number of drugs, including, this isn't the complete list because I have a certain priority for privacy of my own affairs, but the drugs that I take on a daily basis include aspirin and statins. These drugs are widely available, but even if they were not, and I could afford them or access them when others could not, I would take them. I do not take these drugs to get the better of my fellow men and women. I do not take these drugs as a so-called positional good to improve my relative position in comparison with others. I take them to give myself the best chance, in absolute terms, of living a long and a healthy life, which I value greatly. If they are available to all, I lose nothing in this respect. Since I want to live long, it doesn't cost me anything if you also live long. However, while taking aspirin is not straightforwardly, or perhaps one should say not obviously, a means to a positional good, in the same way that taking a performance enhancer before an exam might be, This is an apparent rather than real difference. Consider, if my taking aspirin when others do not means that I live and they do not, I do seem to have acquired, willy-nilly, a positional advantage. I do seem to have, as I say, this positional advantage. I am here and they are nowhere. There could be no clearer positional advantage than that. So just as it's not wrong to save some lives when all cannot be saved, it is not wrong to advantage some in ways that also confer a positional advantage when all cannot have that advantage. Humans, we humans, are creatures that result from an enhancement process called evolution. And as I suggested at the beginning, we are inveterate self-improvers in every conceivable way. Familiar other cognitive enhancers, which you all use, I hope on a daily basis, include written language, formal education, physical exercise, and diet. And all of these create problems of justice, as well as the side effects of use and of overuse. And all of that list, including physical exercise and diet, are demonstrated to confer cognitive advantage as well as all the other advantages. So we all believe in cognitive enhancement. The question is there a relevant distinction between some forms of cognitive enhancement and others? Cognitive enhancements, improvement in brain functioning, are among the most important and most attractive, I think, of all forms of enhancement. Beneficial neural changes have been reported for such familiar technologies as reading, education, physical exercise, diet, and so on. How are drugs different? My other favorite example of a new technology, relatively new, which is instructive, which confers positional advantage, which creates all the problems that arise in terms of enhancements in sports, is a wonderful technology that we are all using at this moment. It's a synthetic technology, but it's terribly useful. We are all at this moment bathed in synthetic sunshine. Now, before synthetic sunshine, of the sort that enable us to see one another now, human beings, or our predecessors, went to sleep when it got dark and worked and played when the sun came up. But with the advent of synthetic sunshine, fantastic technology, work and play could continue, or at least some forms of play, could continue through the hours of darkness, as long as people could afford the technology. So it conferred an advantage on those who could afford sources of synthetic sunshine: firelight, candlelight, lamplight, and electric light. And it didn't come cheap. It was an expensive technology. We have an expression in English, I don't know whether you have it in Serbian, but we have an expression in English, the game is not worth the candle. And this expression arises because when people played a game of cards or dice in an ale house in medieval times in England, in the evening, they had to make a decision as to whether they would pay for a candle so that they could play the game. And if it wasn't a very good game or they got bored with it, they would say the game is not worth the candle. And those, of course, for whom the price of candles was not an issue, could play those games whether they could afford it or not, because they could always afford it. Now, this is an interesting example because it has all the features of the other objections that are often made to enhancement in sports and enhancement in other human activities. They confer positional advantage. They are available primarily to the rich, but they give those who can afford the technology not only an edge, but also a palpable good, something that they want. I suggest that the right solution to new technologies of any sort which confer an advantage is not to take what we call a dog in the manger attitude and say nobody can have it until everybody can have it. It seems to me that that is not the right solution for something that is valuable. Think of organ transplants. We, in my terrible country, allow thousands of people, genuinely thousands of people, to die each year for want of donor organs, which countries elsewhere in Europe, Spain, Belgium, Austria and others, have managed to eliminate this shortage of organs. It is a shame that we do so. But our solution to this terrible injustice is not to say we will stop performing organ transplants until we can make them available to everybody. We say, let's try and improve the supply. We don't say it very sincerely because there are models for improving organ supply which we don't follow. But nonetheless, that's the right solution. Not to shut up shop and say nothing until it's available to everybody, but of course to make it more genuinely available. Consider for the moment another issue that is raised about cognitive enhancement, smart drugs. It's said that they create irresistible competitive pressures, that once somebody uses them, everybody wants them, and therefore they have to be provided for everybody, and therefore it's a bad thing in another respect, that people who would not choose to take them are forced into taking them because others are doing so. Somebody else's kids are taking Ritalin, so your kids have to have them as well. Here the analogy with study, hard work for students, or training in sport seems to me to be a potent one. If a student studies hard, or an athlete trains hard, or exhaustively, or an employee in a corporation works all hours, these things create pressures on others which will be hard to resist. And of course, so these things should create pressures, you might think. If I'm working hard, it's your own stupid fault if you're not working hard as well, and I consequently get the promotion that you would have wished to have. We accept, I think rightly, these competitive pressures. The issue is, of course, not of what, if any, remedy is appropriate, but is this something that is, as it were, part of life or not? And this raises another question, the question of setting limits, for example, to working hours. And of course, most countries in Europe now have working hours regulations, and rightly so. So there are many ways of tackling these allegedly unfair advantages. We can do so through working hours legislation and various other things as well. Working hours directives may be just and may be justified. But we should also remember the virtue of working above and beyond the call of duty. Let me tell you an anecdote which I had. I don't know whether I should name the surgeon involved, but a couple of years ago I was at a conference in Italy, and some of you may know the identity of this individual from the description. I was at a conference in Italy, and a member of the Italian Senate, who was also a well-known transplant surgeon, who had worked in the United States, told this story. He was involved in one of the first liver transplants, human to human. And, sorry, not human to human, animal to human. It was a xenotransplantation of a liver. The patient survived for 72 days and then died. And for every one of those 72 days, this surgeon never left the hospital, never left his patient's side. He stayed in the hospital, he slept there, and he looked after that patient as long as the patient lived. Now, that would contravene any working hours directive, but my question is, should we be pleased or sorry that people are prepared to do that? Is this a shame and a scandal on us human beings that this should have to happen? Or is it one of our redeeming virtues as individuals that we, not uncharacteristically, are prepared to do things like that? We might not wish to require this sort of commitment from people as a condition of their work, but I'm doubtful that we would want to legislate to make it impossible, or to protect people from feeling the moral pressure or commitment or benevolence that leads them to act in this way. Let me say something now about what is safe enough. we are very familiar in Europe with something called the precautionary principle, which requires us, for those who believe in it, which I certainly do not, to consider dangers more probable than benefits, and to act in a so-called precautionary way to make sure that we don't introduce any new technologies that might be dangerous before we are absolutely confident that they are safe. The problem with the precautionary principle is that unless we know all of the relevant facts, we don't know which way of acting will be precautionary. Remedy delayed is remedy denied. And this is a truism that is a cliche that we use about the law. Legal remedy delayed is remedy denied. Well, this is also true of technological remedies, including health remedies. If you don't introduce a new technology as soon as you can, and people will die for the want of benefit of that technology, then that is a huge cost. And unless you know for sure and certain in which direction precaution lies, you cannot operate the precautionary principle. Ritalin is an interesting drug from this point of view. People say that it is premature to give it to healthy children. And yet, Ritalin has been used for more than 35 years, routinely, in children who can't consent for themselves, for the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and also actually for dyslexia and dyspraxia. And hundreds of thousands of children worldwide have been on Ritalin for a very long time. Now, it does have side effects, and some children refuse it because of the side effects. But it's proved safe. Very safe. There aren't any noticeable deaths. The side effects are well known, they're manageable. If kids don't like them, they stop taking them. So it's pretty safe. Why would we not offer it to healthy children and healthy adults? Of course, all drugs have side effects. Nothing is totally safe. But we always have to face the question, is it safe enough to use given the benefits and the expected risks? Drugs that are safe enough for terminal cancer patients are not safe enough even to test in healthy adults. So this is a sort of movable feast. It seems to me that cognitive enhancement that works, if it works, is an opportunity that it is in the interest of society and government and every individual to take. Since governments spend huge amounts on education, and the evidence emerging is that cognitive enhancers improve educational attainment, then it seems to me that we not only have a reason to provide it for ourselves and for our children, but that governments have a reason to make it generally available. As I say, it's no substitute for education, but it just means that the whole educational process starts from a higher base of efficiency. So it looks to me as though this is not only individually prudential and beneficial, but something that societies should consider. So if those wicked people in Oxford down the road from my university start using it, I think we should keep pace with them if we can, and perhaps we should steal a march on them. Very rare for Manchester to be able to steal a march on Oxford, but we do it occasionally. Perhaps we should consider introducing it to our students before our wicked competitors do the same. So I recommend it to you all. Let me end just by raising a few parallels with, some more parallels with sports. It seems to me that we make too much of a fuss about so-called cheating in sports and about the use of performance-enhancing drugs by athletes. I mentioned this earlier today to some of you, but I'll mention it again. A famous English manager of a football team, namely the great Bill Shankly, who managed Liverpool through some of its most successful years, is famous for having said that when somebody said that people took football too seriously, he said, well, football is not, it's not a matter of life and death. It's far more serious than that. Now, I think he was wrong. One of the few things Bill Shankly was wrong about was that football is far less serious than that. It actually doesn't matter whether footballers take performance-enhancing drugs. It does matter that football is, in that wonderful English cliche, a level playing field, that everybody starts from the same base. But what base they start from, it seems to me, is entirely a matter for a decision. Think again about educational attainment, sports attainment. It is a myth that we can have a sort of Olympic spirit in sports. No Olympic athlete can compete in the Olympics without huge amounts of money spent on them. Olympic quality athletes are not Spartans running naked without the benefit of Nike shoes and all the rest. To be a world-class athlete in whatever sport, you need a personal trainer, you need a dietitian, you need probably very specific high-altitude training for certain sorts of sports. If you are in a sport that needs equipment, skiing, tennis, golf, you need high-quality equipment of all sorts. You need the latest racket technology. You need the latest of everything. Nobody who has to work for a living at anything other than their event, whether it's football or athletics, can work for a living at anything but that. So they need to be subsidized. It is an absolute myth that there is this sort of ethic of sports where every one of us can compete on an equal basis with everybody else. It is hugely expensive, hugely elitist. In introducing performance enhancers, we will just be adding one other layer to the terrible injustice that already exists, to the terrible unfairness that if you want your child to be top at anything, whether it's athletics or whether it's as a musician or anything else, it costs a lot and you have to start very early. Athletics is no different, and indeed intellectual activities are no different either. So it seems to me something, just a matter of a decision for us, whether we go down the performance enhancement route in sports or not. The rules of most sports differ not according to some sort of sacred text like the Ten Commandments or something. They are modified all the time to make sport a better spectacle. The rules of football change all the time. The offside rule, how many substitutes you can bring on. This is all changed pretty much constantly to make it a better spectator sport. Those of you who follow Formula One motor racing, the same is true, although it also differs so that car manufacturers can develop sorts of technologies that they can advertise that you have in the car that you buy from, for those of you lucky enough to buy a Ferrari, very few of you, but also, fortunately, other more mundane companies are in motorsport, Toyota, Peugeot, and the others, Honda, and they pretend that the car you buy from the showroom and drive down the street has the same features as their racing cars and their rally cars. What nonsense. They're completely unrecognizable. Even in the case of rallying, where the model is the same superficially, I can assure you, however good a driver you were, you wouldn't coax the performance out of those rally cars that the professionals do. Why? Because they're different cars. So the point is that the rules are malleable for a whole range of reasons, including commercial pressures, the idea of, those include, of course, the sort of spectacle you get from watching the sport. Is it exciting? Is it interesting? Is it televisable? Does it go on too long? In England, we play a game that at the highest level lasts for 5 days. Cricket. Now, that's terribly uncommercial, so we've changed forms of cricket so that we now actually have even forms that last only 1 day. But I can see the competitive pressures increasing so that it will about last for the 90 minutes that a football match lasts. I don't think the 5-day lot can go on. But all of these things have got nothing to do with the so-called ethic of the sport. They have to do with a whole range of different pressures. Now, we may or may not regret that, but it doesn't seem to me that this is either a moral issue or indeed a political issue of any consequence. It's a matter of what rules we choose to have. And this is the last remark I want to make. What is of consequence, though, is whether we as individuals and we as citizens And we, as inhabitants of this particular planet, make the most of our opportunities. The last thing I want to say about cognitive enhancement is that it is vital that our cognitive powers, our intellectual capacities, go on developing, because we have many, many dangers to face. And we need the best brains and the best ability to face those dangers. Apart from the usual ones of new diseases arising all the time, CJD, AIDS, avian flu, to which we need to find answers, we know that in the long term, and I think this is perhaps rather premature to raise this point, but in the long term, this world will be uninhabitable. It may become uninhabitable because we are profligate with our resources, and through global warming and negligence in the way that we use our natural resources, the world may become uninhabitable. But of course it will become uninhabitable anyway when our sun, the sun that provides the real sunshine rather than the synthetic sunshine, dies a natural death in some several billions of years. I hope that our successors will still be around then, and I hope that they will have the wit and the intelligence and the cognitive powers to have developed the ability to find somewhere else in the universe to inhabit, or possibly even in a few billion years' time, to create somewhere else, elsewhere in the universe, that will be safe to inhabit. We'd better believe it, because it's rather short-sighted, in my view, to care just about our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. We may be, whatever your beliefs are, I think hopefully you entertain the possibility that we just may be the only intelligent creatures anywhere in the universe. If we are, and if the wonderful things that go along with being an intelligent individual, arts, science, and so on, creativity, pleasure, drinking, eating, all of it. If we are to go on enjoying all of that, we must hope that we will have the ingenuity and the wit and the technology to survive. To do so, it seems to me that we can't stand still. We will need to go on developing not only our creative powers, but our scientific powers. And to do that, we may need more intelligence than most of us have most of the time. So I think we should start now. So I recommend to you, well, I don't recommend anything. I recommend to you that there is nothing wrong with taking it if you choose to. People always ask me whether I take it myself. I don't. I'm not sure why that I don't. I think if I was Sarah's age, I would consider doing it. But I'm getting on now. I don't want any more promotions in my job. I've had rather too many of those, and I would like less responsibility rather than more. So I'm not too worried about getting an edge, as I once was. And I think I have adequate intelligence for the purposes that I am likely to need it for. But I feel differently about the next generation, my son's generation. He's 23. I hope he will find ways of improving on the intellectual, natural endowment that he has. And I hope many people in this room, and if not you, your children, will do the same. So I don't recommend it, but I point it out. There is a wonderful line in a great play about the English politician, cleric, and philosopher Thomas More. It's a play by Robert Bolt, and at a point in this play, Thomas More, who is then Chancellor of England, advisor to Henry VIII, is asked about a new bright young man whether he would recommend him for a particular high office of state. And More, being a great politician and honest, says, "I do not recommend him, but I point him out." Well, I point out to you the possibility of cognitive enhancers, but personally I don't recommend them. Thank you very much.